If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hey, I've been wanting to do a video game review for a while, and today I wanted to do Final Fantasy XIII. I really enjoyed this series, despite its faults. It was a really, even the first game, this is kind of overdone, the whole talking about the linear, playthrough, but, even the first game with that, I found it to be, really enjoyable, even before the more, open world levels later on in the game. And, the whole, linear playthrough stuff wasn't fun, obviously, but it was such a beautiful game. I remember playing it, when it first came out and just not being able to believe just how beautiful and realistic everything looked. I still get chills playing, I don't remember what level it was, it's been a while, but the one where they're, on, an airship and they're gonna go save, Saz and Vanille, and, you just, everywhere you look around, you just see sky and, little bits of land around you, and it's such a fantastical and just, beautiful, beautiful level. I think that's probably one of my favorite parts of that first game. But if we're going to be talking about, the game that's probably the best of the series, it's kind of a toss-up, because the third and final game was definitely the most fun, I think. But when it comes to the world building and just the overall story in general, I think I'd have to say the first Final 13 game was the best, honestly. Just the concept of Cocoon in the sky and then Grand Pulse down below, and just wondering what Grand Pulse is like the whole time you're in Cocoon before you're finally able to leave. It was just such a fascinating world. One of the things that I think is the most unfortunate about the two sequels is that I just don't find the world to be as interesting, and it's kind of unfortunate that they just left Cocoon behind entirely in the second game, because it was still there, and sure, you kind of revisited it in one of the earlier levels in that game, but just barely. And I think it would have been kind of cool even if they'd had a little bit where you how do you even get back up to Cocoon? How are the people who are living there, the society, and how it's evolved since that whole disaster would have been a really interesting thing to touch on. But instead they just kind of went all over the place with the whole time travel thing. And while it's interesting, the whole time travel thing was interesting, it just didn't really feel like it fit with the Final Fantasy XIII storyline. It kind of felt almost more like a fan fiction. It wasn't a bad fan fiction, but it just didn't really feel like it fit entirely. And what's one of the unfortunate things too that I think that happened is that the characters from the first game, which for me made the game, were barely featured at all, and it became the story of Sarah and Noel instead. And while they're both interesting characters too, it just was it was odd. It was kind of abrupt, and it seemed like they were trying to shake us up, but it just didn't. I think it could have been done a little bit better. But yeah, speaking of the characters, they were just, I'm sure there's lots of people who wouldn't agree with me here, but I just found them to be they felt real to me in the first game. All of their goals and what they wanted just seemed more realistic than Final Fantasy games in the past. Sarah kind of grounded them, Lightning and Snow obviously trying to get her back the entire time. And then they have their band of misfits too that are following them because they're the sea and they obviously don't want to be killed. But then you find out later that they all have their own motivations too, and it just makes for a much more interesting story, because it's a very character-driven plot. And there's this saying that goes, good characters can carry a bad plot, but a good plot can carry bad characters. But I think that this game had a strong plot and strong characters and just made for a very enjoyable experience story-wise. And I think it's good that this game had a good story, because honestly, if it had had a bad story, I feel like it wouldn't have done quite as well as it did, just because of the whole linear and kind of like boring gameplay that I was talking about before. And to kind of like get back into that too, it wasn't just like the playthrough that was a little bit off, it was also the fighting too. It just, they made it so that you could like plan too much out, and it was just a little bit too easy with the paradigm shifts and everything. And it just needed to be like a little bit more challenging, because it seemed like a good battle system, but it just needed a little bit more of a challenge to it. I think they almost had it in that game. It was still fun, but it just needed a little bit more. And then I don't really remember it in the second game, but I feel it was just like kind of more of the same almost. But in the third game, it was really, really fun. They like really made use of like, I don't want to call it like a button mashing game, because it didn't really feel like a button mashing game, but you had to like really think more about what you were doing. And it's just, it felt more fun. It felt like you were actually more involved in the fighting, because like it wasn't really you were making all of your own choices in the battles in the third game, whereas in the other games it almost felt like the game developers were holding your hand the entire way through. But to get back to the characters too, one thing that I really loved about the game too is that it all felt like they belonged together. It's kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy versus the Avengers. In the first Avengers film, like, it's fun to see them all together, but it didn't really feel like they were family yet. Whereas like in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they felt like family. And that's kind of what it's like for Final Fantasy XIII. And I think it helped that they were kind of split up into pairs, like in the beginning bits of the game. And they kind of all bonded like that. And then they were brought together later. And they all like had like the little moments with each other, like save for Fang, because she showed up later. And it just really felt like they belonged together. And it made it even more emotional when they were all consoling Hope, like the youngest member of their group, when he was kind of having a meltdown at one point. And also, it made it more emotional when Hope finally sees Sarah again in the second game, after not seeing any of his friends for years and not knowing what's happened to them, if some of them were even alive. And he has such an emotional reaction, and just kind of like, it just feels like something that you don't get from every storytelling experience. And then the third game too, when like Lightning's going around and just everyone is just so sad and like alone, and they're all split up from each other, and it's just it gets you more than like it would have. Like the third game really is like, the emotional reaction to it is built up so much because they were so together in the first game and then just split apart, and it's just really, it was so sad. And you just wanted them to be friends again the entire time. So every time like Lightning gets one of them to be like less depressed, you're like right there with her. You're like, yeah, it was nice. Honestly, I could go on forever about the characters because I love them, especially Fang. Fang, if she was real, I'd probably marry her. One last thing about the characters would be the representation in that game was absolutely like amazing. I was so like, it was so nice to get Lightning because she's such a kick-ass like character, and she's a girl. And like the last time we had a Final Fantasy lead was way back when Final Fantasy VI comes out, and I love Final Fantasy VI, but it was so long ago. It was still 8-bit, and so it's been a long time coming, I think. And then you get Fang and Vanille, which it's not like official, but it is. like they are definitely in love with each other, and it's just so nice to have that representation too. And then you get Saz, who's such a great father, and he's like, and I feel like black men don't get enough representation as like just like well-rounded people. And I think it's maybe true, especially in video games. Like when you kind of like look into Final Fantasy's past, when you see Barrett, and he's just a he's a very stereotypical black male character. And honestly, the Final Fantasy 13 isn't exempt from stereotypes, but I think it's better. It's like a step in the right direction. One thing I do like about Final Fantasy 13 too, even though everyone's split apart and you don't get like that family feeling from everyone again, you still have Sarah and Noel, who are obviously like best friends, and they're there for each other, and it's nice. You still have like that kind of like human connection, and you kind of get the same vibes that you did from the other characters in the first game. But it makes me wonder if there had been more characters in that game, if you would have got the vibes, because the story was very much all over the place, and I just don't know how they would have been able to tie in more characters and make them like feel real. Especially with that one girl who's always following Hope around all the time. She felt very flat, and it was weird that like she had such a big part in the second game, but then she just dropped off the face of the earth in the third, and you never really found out what happened to her. I don't know if any of the DLC content had her in it, because I never ended up playing it, but yeah, that's just one of those things where nothing ever came from it. Okay, but to get back to like the world and the playthrough, so obviously I've already said like the first game was too linear, and then they seemed like they tried to fix it in the second game, but it just kind of felt like even more stale. And just because like everything wasn't really connected, when they tried to like make some of the levels bigger and everything, it just felt a little boring. Sometimes it didn't really feel like a lot was going on. And yeah, but then in the third game, like even though like the levels were huge and it was amazing, and sometimes you'd be like running through the same part of the level as you had before, but they'd still keep it interesting. Like I remember in one of the big like fieldy levels, they would have different monsters that would show up at like different parts of the day, and like things would kind of change up, and they just kind of like just kept things interesting even though it was the same. It was like they'd taken the more open and like fun levels from Grand Pulse in the first game and like really optimized them. Yeah, and it was just like so much more fun. And when it comes to like Final Fantasy 13, what I like wonder is like the people who made that game, do they even like playing video games? Like I just don't, how can anyone who likes playing video games make a video game like that? It's kind of like a YouTuber, like someone who wants to be a YouTuber not watching YouTube videos. It almost feels like a little tone deaf. And they made Lightning Returns really interesting by setting it 13 days before the world ended, and they had like kind of like a timer the entire game. You had 13 days to achieve everything, and the clock was like ticking down the entire time, and it like gives a sense of urgency to the gameplay. In the end, you end up having like more than enough time to finish everything, but you don't really know that at the beginning. It just like shakes things up a little bit and keeps them fun. And like when Lightning in the last game is being sucked into darkness and she's going to be alone forever, and she finally realizes that she doesn't want to be alone, and she just kind of calls out that she just doesn't want to be alone, and her friend Hope is there to help guide her back to the light. It's such an emotional thing, and I feel like it's like the climax of the game almost. What could have also been the climax was when she finally defeated God, and that's one of the things that kind of ties the games together, even though, like I said before, they kind of don't feel like they're the same series almost, just because the second game is so disconnected from the first storyline and like just the general like vibe of the game. But in the first game, they're trying to bring down the gods that control their society, who are really honestly trying to kill them. So the entire series is basically about taking down false gods and gods that would want to take advantage of us. And finally, in the last game, the god that even made all like the I think they were called the Felsi, just even the one that made them suffer so much and in turn made humanity suffer so much, is just, they are all powerful, and Lightning, just a normal human, like just is able to defeat him, and it's such a powerful and climactic moment. It was, yeah, when I thought about it later, it's just such an interesting series. It really is just a series about taking down false gods, and it's really interesting. And then there's another function in the third game where you can change Lightning's clothes, and I'm all about that. And one thing I really like about it is that it's almost kind of like grown-up Barbie. Like when I was little, my favorite part about playing Barbies was the clothes. And so yeah, just like being able to like wear whatever the heck you want in that game was a lot of fun. My one complaint is that like the clothes, it didn't feel like there was a lot of variety. Obviously they're all going to be like Final Fantasy-ish. They're all going to have that like crazy look to them. They're not going to be like normal clothes. But I would have liked some more normal clothes, maybe some more dresses. She's got like one really cool dress that she gets to wear, but that's it. Maybe if you'd been able to change like top and bottom separately, than having to wear like just the outfit that it chose for you, would have been cool too. And yeah, one thing that comes with the clothes thing is something that people have called out for them, like over-sexualizing Lightning, which like every game she gets a little bit more scantily clad than she was before. And sure, in the first game she's kind of running around in a mini skirt anyway, but she's still, just the way that they designed her, she still looked like really official and really badass. And in the second game too, sure, she's got like legs for days, but she still looks really badass. And like the third game, she still looks badass too. But then you, like, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't be as like weirded out by the fact that like all of her clothes are sexed up in the last game, if it weren't for the fact that like women are usually the one getting sexed up in video games. And then there was this interview too where one of the guys in charge of Final Fantasy, at least that game, kind of said something about how like, oh yeah, when Lightning turns in the fights, her boobs jiggle, and it's like, why do you even need to point that out? Like, yeah, you could have like that as a feature, sure, whatever, boobs jiggle, that's physics, but like pointing it out is just strange, and it almost feels a little bit tone deaf, and it makes me think of another video game character, Quiet, from the Metal Gear Solid series, who is obviously like wearing like just the most ridiculous outfit, and it just doesn't really feel like it fits with the story either. And same with like Lightning's clothes, they don't feel like they fit with the stories, because everyone else is just dressed like a normal person, and then you get like a girl like running around in a thong and it's like, why? But whatever. But yeah, back to Quiet, like one of the things that's like kind of tone deaf about her that I remember reading about was how I think she has like a history of like physical or sexual abuse. I'm not certain, but then there was a story that came out where she had this figurine where you're able to like squish and like mold her boobs, and it's like having a figurine where you can do that, it's like, sure, whatever, but having a figurine where you can do that to her, but the character has like a history of sexual abuse, and then you can like just do that to her, it was just kind of weird. And honestly, the whole like boob jiggling Final Fantasy thing with Lightning was just kind of like, it made me think of it, especially since she was supposed to be such a powerful character, but then you just kind of like bring her down to like how she looks. And like, I'm not necessarily opposed to like characters like dressing however, like a girl being covered head to toe in a video game or like wearing whatever isn't that big of a deal. But it's just maybe like maybe it's just the fact that male characters, and like I'm just to talk about Final Fantasy right now, maybe it's just the fact that like the male characters in the game are, it's mostly focused on their strength and their character. And then you have Lightning, who in the first game it was like that. It was like focused on her strength and her character, but then they kind of just boiled her down to the bare essentials in the third game. I don't know. I'm so on the fence about these kind of things because I think women should wear what they want, and I don't think there's anything dirty about the woman's body. Like, honestly, like, it's so weird. It's just, maybe it's just the objectification of it that weirds me out, because I don't know. Like, Lightning's a character that means like a lot to me, and to just see her boiled down to that, almost like she's just a porn star, it was strange. It was weird. Maybe it wouldn't have been as weird if other characters, like male characters, had their own versions of those outfits too. I don't know. It's kind of like a accumulation of things, like Lightning having all those crazy outfits wouldn't have been as big of a deal if it hadn't been for some of the comments from the video game creators. I don't know. I'm still kind of up in the air about it all. I don't really know. I don't really know what I'm trying to say, to be completely honest. But if you want to comment on that down below, go ahead and maybe try and help me sort out my thoughts on the matter. Lightning Returns was a really stunning ending to what could have been a really, really amazing trilogy. And honestly, even if you don't want to go through the pain of playing the first two games, you should still play the third, because it's really fun. I don't know how many times I've played it. It's lots of fun, so definitely go play that one, even if you don't want to play the other two. But you should still play the other two. And I have a soft spot for these games. Honestly, I love them a lot. And I love all the Final Fantasy games a lot, but I don't know. There's something about this trilogy that I just really enjoyed. And I wish that it could have got the attention to detail maybe that it deserved. Well, thanks for watching, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more from me. I'll see you later!